world runs fine without your constant worrying. At this exact second, gravity is holding billions of tons of water in place. Trees are converting carbon dioxide into oxygen in the dark. The Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. None of these massive critical operations require your input. They happened yesterday, they are happening now, and they will continue long after you fall asleep. Yet, when the lights go out, a specific kind of anxiety often takes hold. It is the subtle, nagging sensation that your life, and the world around it, needs your constant mental supervision to keep from falling apart. We tend to confuse worry with necessary maintenance. The mind acts as if running through worst-case scenarios is the same thing as preventing them. It feels like gripping the steering wheel of a parked car, convinced that your tension is the only thing keeping it from drifting into traffic. But the mechanics of reality are far more robust than that. The world is a durable, self-sustaining machine. If you look at the evidence, you see that almost everything operates on autopilot. The streetlights cycle through their colors on empty streets. The economy continues to churn across different time zones. The seasons shift incrementally while you are busy doing other things. Even your own biology is independent of your concern. Your heart beats and your cells divide without waiting for a conscious command. This realization is not meant to imply that you are insignificant. It is meant to prove that you are safe to rest. The machinery of existence does not run on the fuel of your stress. You are allowed to clock out. You can step away from the controls, close your eyes, and trust that the sun will inevitably rise in the east, whether you are awake to check on it or not. Moods are weather. They pass without changing who you are. If you stand in a valley during a heavy storm, the mountains vanish. The horizon is erased by a wall of grey. Visually, the world has shrunk down to a few feet of wet earth. But structurally, nothing has changed. The mountains are still solid stone. The horizon is still miles away. The only thing that has altered is the visibility. Human emotions operate on this exact same principle. We often confuse the weather of the mind with the geology of the self. When a strong mood settles in, whether it is a heavy fog of sadness or a heat wave of anger, it tends to claim total ownership of your reality. It convinces you that this feeling is not just a temporary state, but your permanent setting. You begin to believe that because you feel heavy right now, you are a heavy person. This is a distortion caused by proximity. Because the emotion is happening inside your head, it feels indistinguishable from your identity. But moods are transient biological events. They are shifting tides of chemistry and energy, often triggered by things as simple as fatigue, hunger, or a passing thought. They roll in like a cold front, change the atmosphere, and eventually drift out. The observer behind the mood remains untouched. Your core values, your memories, and your personality are the landscape that sits beneath the weather. A storm may rage for an hour or a week, soaking everything in its path, but it cannot turn a mountain into a valley. It cannot erode who you are. You do not need to force the clouds to move or analyze why it is raining. You simply need to remember that you are the enduring landscape, not the passing storm. No one remembers your embarrassing moments like you do. Imagine a stage where every single actor believes they are the only person illuminated by the spotlight. They move with rigid self-consciousness, convinced that the entire audience is scrutinizing their every gesture. This is the standard operating mode of the human mind in social spaces. We walk around with a deeply inflated sense of our own visibility. When you make a social error, a stumbled sentence, a spilled drink, or a joke that lands in silence, your internal recorder captures it in vivid detail. Your brain tags this moment as a high-priority event, replaying it on a loop to analyze the failure. To you, the event feels like a glaring neon sign that defines your character. The heat of the moment sears it into your long-term memory. However, if you shift the camera angle to the perspective of everyone else in the room, the scene looks drastically different. The people around you are not the audience. They are fellow actors who are desperately trying to remember their own lines. They are consumed by their own internal narratives, their tight shoes, their upcoming deadlines, or their own fluctuating insecurities. In their movie, you are merely an extra in the background. Human memory is inherently selfish. It is designed to retain information that is vital to the survival and social standing of the owner. Information about a minor mishap involving someone else is classified as junk data by the brain. It is held in short-term memory for only a few seconds and then discarded to make room for personal concerns. Consider the fact that you likely cannot recall a single embarrassing thing a stranger did 3 years ago. Yet you can probably list your own mishaps from a decade ago with perfect clarity. This discrepancy is the proof. You are not being haunted by the collective memory of society. You are being haunted by a trick of your own ego. The world has already moved on, and it is safe for you to do the same. Uncertainty is normal. Clarity is the exception. Picture a hiker moving through a dense forest at twilight. They carry a lantern that casts a small circle of light, illuminating only the ground a few feet ahead. Beyond that ring of visibility, the trees fade into shadow. This is the most accurate representation of the human experience. We tend to believe that the entire path should be lit up like a runway, stretching clearly from where we stand all the way to the horizon. When it isn't, we panic. We have culturally conditioned ourselves to treat uncertainty as a defect. We view the inability to predict the next 5 years as a sign of poor planning or a lack of ambition. The mind craves patterns and guarantees, so when it encounters the fog of the future, it triggers an alarm. It interprets the lack of clear answers as a threat to survival. We convince ourselves that everyone else is operating with a detailed map, and we are the only ones improvising. However, clarity is not the standard state of existence. It is a rare, fleeting exception. The world is a system of infinite variables. Between the economy, the actions of strangers, and the shifting nature of your own desires, the future is mathematically impossible to script. To demand absolute certainty from a chaotic universe is to ask for something that nature cannot provide. Accepting this reality relieves a tremendous amount of pressure. Being unsure of your destination does not mean you are lost. It simply means you are engaging with the future honestly. You are not failing because you don't have a 10-year plan. You are functioning exactly as a human is meant to function. You do not need to see the mountaintop to keep walking. You only need enough light to navigate the single step directly in front of you. Others' perceptions of you are not your responsibility. If you walk into a gallery and stand before a vivid abstract painting, you will see a specific set of colors and shapes. The person standing to your left might see a landscape, while the person to your right sees a portrait of chaos. The painting itself does not change based on these observations. It remains exactly what it is, while the viewers project their own histories, moods, and biases onto the canvas. You are that painting, and everyone you meet is a different viewer bringing their own lighting to the room. We often live as though we are the curators of other people's minds. We spend an enormous amount of energy trying to edit ourselves to fit someone else's expectations. We over-explain our choices, polish our personalities, and monitor our tone, hoping to force a specific image into the minds of those around us. We act as if we are responsible for the mental filing cabinets of our friends, family, and strangers, believing that if someone misunderstands us, it is a fire we are obligated to put out. However, a person's perception of you is formed through a lens you didn't build. Their opinion of you is filtered through their own past traumas, their current stress levels, and their unique cultural upbringing. If someone is committed to seeing you as difficult, 1,000 kind acts will not change their mind. If someone is determined to see you as a hero, they will ignore your flaws. You are essentially being viewed through a cracked mirror that you didn't break. Realizing that you cannot control the internal weather of others is a massive weight off your shoulders. You can be the most honest, kind version of yourself and still be the villain in someone else's story. That is not a failure of your character. It is a limitation of their perspective. Once you stop trying to manage the version of you that lives in other people's heads, You gain the freedom to focus on the only version that actually matters, the one who lives in yours. There is a predictable biological glitch that occurs when the human mind stays active past its natural stopping point. During the daylight hours, your brain processes the world using a balanced mixture of emotion and logic. It has the energy to contextualize problems, sorting them into manageable categories. But this high-level processing requires fuel, and by the time late night arrives, that tank is essentially empty. The part of your brain responsible for perspective and reasoning effectively goes offline to recharge. However, the emotional centers of the brain do not need as much energy to function. They remain wide awake and highly reactive. This creates a dangerous imbalance in the system. Without the logical guard standing at the door, raw emotions are allowed to roam freely without any supervision or context. This is why a simple worry about a deadline can suddenly mutate into a conviction that you are failing at life. You interpret this sudden, heavy intensity as clarity. You tell yourself that the distractions of the day have faded, and you are finally seeing the cold, hard truth of your situation. But this is a deception caused by fatigue. You are not seeing the truth. You are seeing a distorted image produced by a tired machine. The despair you feel at 2 a.m. is rarely based on new evidence or actual reality. It is a physiological symptom, much like a headache or a cramp. It is the sensation of a brain trying to solve complex equations while running on fumes. The problems are not actually insurmountable. They just appear that way because you currently lack the mental resources to lift them. When you wake up, the chemistry will reset, the logic will return, and the truth will look much less frightening in the sunlight. Problems are judged tasks. Consider a mountain climber standing before a steep vertical wall. To an observer at the bottom, that wall looks like a massive, stressful problem that might prevent the climber from reaching the peak. But to the climber, that wall is simply a series of specific movements. It is a matter of finding a finger hold, shifting weight to the left foot, and reaching for a ledge. The problem is actually just a sequence of physical tasks that need to be performed in order. We often lose our peace of mind because we wrap our daily responsibilities in layers of heavy judgment. We don't just see a sink full of dishes, we see a symbol of our domestic failure. We don't just see a difficult email that needs a reply, we see a threat to our professional reputation. We take a neutral action and coat it in a thick layer of bad, scary, or overwhelming. This judgment is what creates the feeling of a problem. The task itself is usually quite small, but the label we give it is what makes it heavy. When you strip away the labels, you find that almost every problem is just a task that you have decided to feel a certain way about. An engine light on a dashboard is just a requirement to call a mechanic. A disagreement with a friend is just a requirement to have a conversation. The stress doesn't come from the situation itself, but from the story we tell ourselves about what the situation means for our future or our worth. By looking at your life as a series of judged tasks, you regain your agency. You can acknowledge the feeling of dread without letting it stop your hands from moving. You can decide to unjudge the task, viewing it as a neutral step in your day rather than an emergency. When you stop arguing with the reality of what needs to be done, the problem evaporates, leaving behind only a simple, manageable next step. You've survived 100% of your worst days so far. If you were to unroll the timeline of your life, you would find specific dates marked with heavy black ink. These are the days when the ceiling felt too low, when grief, failure, or panic made the air feel thin. At the time, those moments did not feel like chapters. They felt like the final page of the book. Your brain, in its state of emergency, convinced you that there was no after to what you were experiencing. It told you that the pain was permanent and the obstacle was immovable. Yet the very fact that you are present right now serves as irrefutable evidence to the contrary. You navigated the impossible terrain. You woke up the next morning, and the morning after that. The biology of the human system is designed for adaptation. Slowly, the sharp edges of those crises wore down. The events that once dominated your entire horizon eventually shrunk until they became just another part of your history. We often forget our own durability because the mind focuses on the threat immediately in front of it. It discards the data of previous victories to focus on the current challenge. But the data remains valid. You have faced the unknown, the unfair, and the unbearable, and in every single instance, you have emerged on the other side. Resilience is not always a loud roar of triumph. Often, it is just the quiet, mundane act of continuing to breathe when you want to stop. You hold an undefeated record against your darkest days. The current struggle may feel unique, and it may feel heavier than the rest, but it belongs to the same category as the ones before it. It is a temporary state, and you are fully equipped to outlast it. Productivity comes in seasons, not straight lines. If you were to unroll the timeline of your life, you would find specific dates marked with heavy black ink. These are the days when the ceiling felt too low, when grief, failure, or panic made the air feel thin. At the time, those moments did not feel like chapters. They felt like the final page of the book. Your brain, in its state of emergency, convinced you that there was no after to what you were experiencing. It told you that the pain was permanent and the obstacle was immovable. Yet, the very fact that you are present right now serves as irrefutable evidence to the contrary. You navigated the impossible terrain. You woke up the next morning and the morning after that. The biology of the human system is designed for adaptation. Slowly, the sharp edges of those crises wore down. The events that once dominated your entire horizon eventually shrunk until they became just another part of your history. We often forget our own durability because the mind focuses on the threat immediately in front of it. It discards the data of previous victories to focus on the current challenge. But the data remains valid. You have faced the unknown, the unfair, and the unbearable. And in every single instance, you have emerged on the other side. Resilience is not always a loud roar of triumph. Often, it is just the quiet, mundane act of continuing to breathe when you want to stop. You hold an undefeated record against your darkest days. The current struggle may feel unique, and it may feel heavier than the rest, but it belongs to the same category as the ones before it. It is a temporary state, and you are fully equipped to outlast it. Your body possesses an inherent knowledge of how to let go, even when your mind is resistant. Watch a leaf detach from a branch. It does not calculate the wind speed or analyze the trajectory of its descent. It simply releases its grip and allows gravity to handle the rest. This natural, effortless surrender is exactly what your body is trying to do right now, even while your mind is frantically trying to stay in control. There is often a silent conflict happening when you lie down. Your mind is pacing back and forth, holding on to the day's stress, convinced that it needs to supervise the process of falling asleep. It acts like a pilot who refuses to trust the autopilot, gripping the controls until its knuckles turn white. It treats rest like a complex project that must be managed and executed perfectly. But your body operates on a much older, deeper intelligence. Deep inside your nervous system, the instructions for rest are already written. You do not need to tell your heart to slow its rhythm. You do not need to command your muscles to soften or your breathing to deepen. These are automatic responses, programmed into your biology long before you ever learned how to worry. Your physical form knows the exact chemical recipe for sleep. It knows how to lower your internal temperature and how to shut down the sensory inputs that keep you alert. The struggle you feel is usually just the friction of your mind trying to do a job that doesn't belong to it. Sleep is not something you achieve, it is something you accept. If you simply stop fighting the current, the biology takes over. Your body knows the way down into the dark. It has caught you every single night of your life, and it is ready to catch you again tonight. Ordinary moments are the life you're working toward. If you watch a grand fireworks display, you are witnessing a moment of peak intensity. It is bright, loud, and demanding of your total attention. But no one builds a home inside a firework. We understand that the spectacle is a temporary event, a brief flash of heat before the sky returns to its natural, quiet state. Yet, when it comes to our own happiness, we often spend our lives waiting for the next explosion, convinced that the real part of our existence hasn't started yet. We tend to view our lives as a series of hurdles to be cleared. We tell ourselves that once we finish this degree, land that promotion, or reach a specific financial milestone, we will finally arrive at the destination where life truly begins. We treat the present as a waiting room, a necessary but boring stretch of road we must endure to reach the big moments. We act as if the mundane Tuesday mornings and the quiet evenings spent doing chores are merely the tax we pay for the rare weekends of excitement. However, if you look at the logic of your own ambitions, a different truth emerges. You work hard specifically so that you can have the luxury of a quiet, peaceful afternoon. You strive for security so that you can sit in a comfortable chair and drink a cup of coffee without worry. The big goals are actually just the scaffolding designed to protect the small moments. The ordinary minutes are the prize. They are the actual substance of the life you're currently working so hard to build. When you are washing the dishes, walking the dog, or sitting in traffic, you aren't in between events. You are in the main event. These moments are the quiet, steady breath of a life well lived. They are the solid ground that the fireworks are meant to illuminate, and they are already here, waiting for you to notice them. We condition ourselves to view happiness as a loud, climatic event. When we visualize making it, we usually picture a moment of high drama, crossing a finish line, signing a massive contract, or standing on a stage while a crowd applauds. We treat these peaks as the destination, convinced that the purpose of life is to perpetually chase the next adrenaline spike. However, if you analyze what people actually do after they achieve those goals, the picture shifts. When the applause fades and the work is finished, nobody stays on the stage. They go home. They put on comfortable clothes. They sit in a quiet room and hold a warm cup of coffee. The ultimate reward for all that effort is not the victory itself, but the peace that follows it. The irony is that the life you are working so hard to build is mostly made up of the mundane things you likely already have. The goal of the hustle is to secure a Tuesday evening where nothing goes wrong. You are striving for the luxury of a boring weekend, for the safety to cook a meal without anxiety, or the freedom to watch the rain against the window without feeling guilty. We often mistake these quiet intervals for waiting rooms, spaces we just have to endure until the next big thing happens. But these ordinary moments are not the loading screens of your life. They are the game itself. The texture of your days is defined by the simple, repetitive comforts, not the rare milestones. If you are safe, fed, and resting in a quiet space right now, you are not waiting for the prize. You are currently inhabiting it. The extraordinary life you are chasing is actually just this ordinary moment, fully realized. Silence is restorative, not empty. Imagine walking into a room that is completely empty. There is no furniture, no decoration, and no noise. Your first instinct is likely to view this space as unfinished. We are culturally conditioned to see emptiness as a defect, a gap that needs to be filled immediately with objects, sounds, or tasks. We treat silence in the same way. When the noise of the day finally stops, we often feel a reflex to reach for a phone or turn on the television, viewing the quiet as a void that must be avoided. However, silence is not a vacuum. It is a biological necessity. Think of your mind like a high-performance engine. Throughout the day, it processes millions of data points, conversations, traffic signals, work emails, and social cues. This constant input generates heat. Silence is the coolant. It is the specific environmental condition required for your brain to switch from intake mode to maintenance mode. In agriculture, farmers will often leave a field entirely empty for a season. To a casual observer, that land looks wasted. it appears to be doing nothing. But beneath the surface, the soil is actively regenerating. It is restoring the nutrients and structure necessary to support future growth. If the farmer insisted on planting crops every single month without a break, the soil would eventually turn to dust. Your mind works on this exact principle. The quiet moments you experience at night are not wasted time. They are the fallow season. This is when your brain archives memories, discards irrelevant information, and repairs the frayed edges of your focus. You do not need to fill this space to make it valuable. The value is in the emptiness itself. You can stop trying to populate the silence and simply let it do its work of putting you back together. Your inefficiencies are human texture, not flaws. If you run your hand across a piece of mass-produced plastic, it feels perfectly smooth. It is uniform, predictable, and completely devoid of character. Now compare that to a piece of handcrafted wood. You will feel the grain, the knots, and the slight unevenness of the surface. In the world of manufacturing, these variations are considered defects. But in the world of art and living things, this is called texture. It is what separates the real from the artificial. We currently live in a culture that is obsessed with the plastic version of existence. We are constantly told to optimize our routines, to hack our habits, and to streamline our days for maximum output. We view our natural tendencies, like daydreaming, taking a slow morning, or getting sidetracked by a nostalgic song, as system errors. We treat our quirks as inefficiencies that need to be debugged and removed so we can run faster. But efficiency is a metric designed for machines, not for human beings. A life that is perfectly optimized is also perfectly sterile. If you successfully removed every single inefficient part of your day, you would not become a better person. You would simply become a robot. The moments where you drift off, where you hesitate, or where you choose the scenic route over the fast route are not failures of discipline. They are the friction that proves you are alive. Your personality lives in these unpolished spaces. The wasted time spent staring out a window is often where creativity regenerates. The inefficient conversation that runs too long is where deep connection happens. You are organic matter, not software. You are supposed to have grain, knots, and uneven edges. You do not need to sand yourself down until you are smooth, frictionless, and unrecognizable. The texture is the point. The universe doesn't judge your mistakes. When a tree grows a branch that becomes too heavy and snaps off in a storm, the forest does not hold a trial. The tree does not pause its growth to internalize the failure, nor does the soil refuse to drink the rain because a mistake occurred. In the natural world, events simply happen. They are not categorized as successes or failures, but rather as adjustments in a constantly shifting environment. Humans, however, are unique in our ability to attach a moral narrative to simple cause and effect. We live in a social structure built on rules and reputations, so we instinctively project this framework onto the universe itself. We imagine that reality keeps a permanent scorecard. We feel that when we stumble, whether it is a failed career move, a broken relationship, or a lapse in judgment, the universe makes a note of it, lowering our standing in the cosmic order. But the universe does not operate on a system of crime and punishment. It operates on physics and biology. Gravity does not judge you when you drop a glass. It simply pulls the object to the floor. The sun does not withhold its light because you sent an embarrassing email. These forces are entirely neutral. They interact with you based on your presence, not your performance history. This cosmic indifference is actually a profound source of comfort. It means that your mistakes are not stains on your soul. They are merely data points in a long life. The guilt you carry is a weight you have strapped to your own back, not a sentence handed down by existence. The world around you has already absorbed the impact of your error and moved on. The grass is still growing, the tides are still turning, and the universe is ready to work with whoever you choose to be in this next moment. The right path only makes sense in hindsight. If you view a winding river from the window of an airplane, its path looks perfect. It cuts a logical, inevitable line through the landscape, bending around mountains, and finding the most efficient route to the ocean. But if you are down in a boat on that same river, the logic disappears completely. All you see are blind corners, rough water, and stretches where the current seems to be pulling you backwards. This is the fundamental error we make when evaluating our own lives. We judge our daily experience from the perspective of the boat, but we expect the clarity of the airplane. We live with a constant low-level anxiety that we have somehow strayed from the right path simply because the road ahead isn't a straight, visible line. We assume that if we were truly on track, we would feel a sense of clear, linear momentum. However, a straight line is a geometry concept, not a reality of human existence. If you examine the history of almost any fulfilled person, you will not find a simple trajectory. You will find a jagged map filled with U-turns, failed experiments, and years spent wandering in directions that seemed pointless at the time. In the moment, those diversions felt like failure. They felt like lost time. It is only when you arrive at a later destination that the pattern reveals itself. Suddenly, that wasted year in a random job becomes the specific experience that qualifies you for your dream role. The painful detour becomes the reason you met a partner or discovered a talent. The logic of your life is retroactive. It is written in the past tense. This means you are free to stop panicking about your current lack of visibility. Confusion is not a sign that you have broken your compass. It is simply the view from inside the canyon. You are building the map with every step you take, and one day, when you look back, this confusing stretch will look exactly like the necessary turn it was always meant to be. Pain does not reduce your capacity for joy. Imagine a violin that has just played a heartbreaking, mournful piece of music. When the final note fades, the wood of the instrument is not damaged. The strings are not permanently tuned to a minor key. The instrument retains its perfect ability to play a lively, joyous concerto the very next moment. The sadness of the previous song did not erode the violin's potential. It simply demonstrated its range. Humans often view their emotional capacity as a single vessel with a limited amount of space. We instinctively feel that if we are filled with grief, anxiety, or pain, we have been displaced. We fear that sorrow takes up residence in the soul and evicts our ability to be happy, leaving us with no room for light. We worry that a heavy season permanently alters our chemistry, making us incapable of the lightness we used to know. But the architecture of the human heart is more complex than a simple container. Evidence suggests that emotions operate less like a storage tank and more like a muscle or a landscape. When you endure a period of deep suffering, you are essentially stretching the limits of what you can feel. You are carving out a deeper canyon within yourself. While that canyon may currently be filled with shadow, the excavation itself has created more volume. The same depth that holds the sorrow today is the exact same depth that will be available to hold joy tomorrow. Often, the person who has weathered the storm finds that their future joy is richer, more resonant, and more profound because they understand the contrast. Much of your stress comes from your environment, not you. If you take a healthy, thriving fern and place it in a closet with no light and poor air circulation, it will eventually begin to wilt. When this happens, you do not blame the plant. You do not accuse the fern of having a bad attitude or lacking the motivation to be green. You immediately recognize that the environment is incompatible with the life of the plant. However, when it comes to our own wilting, we rarely extend this same logic to ourselves. When you feel agitated, overwhelmed, or drained, the default human response is to internalize the failure. You look in the mirror and decide that you are not disciplined enough, that you are too sensitive, or that you simply aren't trying hard enough. You treat your stress as a defect in your character, rather than a reaction to your setting. But the human nervous system is permeable. It is constantly absorbing sensory input from the world around it. Harsh lighting, constant noise, visual clutter, and the emotional temperature of the people nearby are not just background details. They are physical inputs that your body must process. If you are sitting in a chaotic room, your brain is burning energy just to filter out the distractions. If you are in a tense social environment, your body is microdosing adrenaline to keep you alert. Recognizing this shifts the problem from who you are to where you are. It suggests that you might not be a broken person, but rather a functional person in a malfunctioning space. The tightness in your chest might not require years of therapy to resolve. It might simply require a quiet walk, a cleaner desk, or a different room. You do not always need to fix yourself. Sometimes you just need to change your container. Low periods are part of growth, not failure. If you observe a garden in the dead of winter, it appears to be a graveyard. The branches are bare, the soil is frozen hard, and the colourful blooms of the previous season have turned into brown dust. To a casual observer, it looks like the plants have stopped working. It looks like failure. But if you were to dig beneath the frost line, you would find a very different reality. The energy of the garden hasn't vanished. It has simply migrated. During the cold months, trees and plants stop putting energy into the showy, visible parts of their existence, the leaves and flowers, to focus entirely on their root systems. They are driving deeper into the dark earth, anchoring themselves against future storms, and gathering the nutrients necessary for the next spring. Human beings tend to judge their lives exclusively by the summer metric. We have convinced ourselves that healthy living looks like constant, visible production. We expect to be perpetually happy, energetic, and achieving. When a low period arrives, when our motivation dissolves or our mood sinks, we diagnose it as a malfunction. We assume we are moving backward because we cannot see any new branches growing. However, these heavy, quiet seasons are almost always periods of subterranean growth. Your mind is pulling its resources inward to process complex changes, to heal from past stress, or to build a stronger foundation for your identity. You are not stagnant, you are rooting. Accepting this view removes the panic from the pause. It allows you to respect the low tide instead of fighting it. You are not failing to grow just because you aren't currently blooming. You are simply doing the invisible, necessary work of survival that allows the bloom to happen later. The stillness is not the end of the road, it is the deepening of the well. You build yourself. You don't find yourself. Imagine you are walking through a dense forest, clutching a faded map, searching for a buried chest that contains your true personality. This is the romantic but misleading way we are often taught to view identity. We speak of finding ourselves as if the perfect version of who we are is a pre-existing object hidden somewhere in the world, waiting for us in a new city, a different career, or a transformative backpacking trip. This perspective creates a quiet, constant anxiety that you are currently looking in the wrong place. However, the reality of human development is far more practical. You are not an archaeologist digging for a relic. You are an architect raising a structure. The self you are looking for does not currently exist because you are still in the process of manufacturing it. Identity is not uncovered, it is accumulated. Every time you choose to be patient instead of angry, you are laying a brick. Every new skill you learn is a beam added to the ceiling. The music you listen to, the friends you keep, and the habits you repeat are the raw materials of this construction project. You are not revealing a statue that was already there. You are assembling a mosaic from the pieces you pick up every day. This shift in perspective is incredibly liberating. It means you can stop worrying that you have missed your calling or that you are on the wrong path to self-discovery. You cannot be lost when you are the one pouring the foundation. You do not need to travel to a distant mountain to locate your purpose. You simply need to look at the materials in front of you right now, your current choices, and decide what kind of room you want to build next. The perfect version of you doesn't exist. In the quiet corners of your imagination, there lives a phantom. This alternate version of you wakes up instantly when the alarm goes off, never procrastinates on difficult tasks, and always says the perfect thing in social situations. They are efficient, composed, and tirelessly productive. Most of us spend our days unknowingly competing against this imaginary doppelganger, measuring our messy reality against their theoretical perfection. The problem with this comparison is that the perfect version of you is not a goal to be reached. It is a collage of best-case scenarios that never exist simultaneously. You have stitched together a fantasy where you possess the energy of your best day, the focus of your sharpest hour, and the patience of your calmest moment, all running permanently in the background. You are judging your raw, unedited footage against a highlight reel that doesn't actually exist. Human beings are not designed to be static, optimized machines. We are biological systems governed by rhythms, hormones, and environmental feedback. A machine can run at 100% efficiency until it breaks, but a living organism must fluctuate. There are seasons for high energy and seasons for dormancy. To be perfect, in the way we often imagine, it would require you to be robotic, predictable, and ultimately not alive. Letting go of this phantom is not an act of giving up. It is an act of making friends with reality. When you stop chasing the myth of the optimized self, you are free to inhabit the actual life you are living. You are allowed to be a person who sometimes gets tired, who occasionally says the wrong thing, and who needs to rest. You are not a failed version of a perfect being. You are a successful version of a human being. Forgetting is a form of healing. If you were to live in a house where you never threw anything away, you would eventually find yourself trapped. Every receipt, every empty box, and every scrap of paper would pile up until there was no room left for you to stand. We intuitively understand that clearing out physical clutter is necessary for a functional home, yet we often view our minds as infinite hard drives that are supposed to retain every single file forever. We tend to treat forgetting as a failure of character. We worry that if the sharp details of a memory fade, we are losing something vital, or worse, that we are betraying the past. But biologically, the act of forgetting is not a glitch. It is a highly sophisticated cleaning system. Your brain is actively designed to prune away connections that are no longer serving your survival. It washes away the excess noise so that you can hear the present moment. Consider the mechanics of a physical injury. When you first cut your skin, the nerves send a high-volume alarm signal to get your attention. As the wound heals, that signal is gradually dialed down until it goes silent. The scar remains, but the sensation of the cut is gone. Emotional forgetting follows this exact same protocol. It is the process of decoupling the memory of an event from the visceral feeling of it. It allows you to remember a difficult time without having to relive the adrenaline and the heartache every time you think of it. This erosion of detail is not a loss. It is a mercy. It is your mind's way of smoothing down the sharp edges of your history so that you can carry it without being cut. You are not losing your past. You are simply healing from it. Other people's behavior is rarely about you. Imagine standing on a crowded sidewalk when a stranger rushes past and bumps your shoulder hard, not bothering to apologize. Your immediate instinct is to interpret this physical contact as a personal insult. You assume they saw you, evaluated you, and decided you weren't worth the space. You might spend the next hour stewing over the disrespect, wondering what you did to invite such aggression. But if you were able to pause that moment and step inside that stranger's mind, the picture would change instantly. You would likely find a chaotic storm of concerns that has absolutely nothing to do with you. Perhaps they are late for a job interview that determines their rent. Maybe they just received a frightening medical diagnosis on the phone. Or perhaps they are simply fighting a migraine that has narrowed their vision to a blurry tunnel. In that narrative, you are not the protagonist or even the antagonist. You are merely a prop, a lamppost or a mailbox that they accidentally collided with while navigating their own crisis. Human beings naturally view the world through a lens of ego. Because you are the main character of your own life, you subconsciously assume you are a central figure in everyone else's. But the truth is that you are a background extra in billions of other movies. When a friend takes days to text back, or a partner is quiet at dinner, or a boss is critical, they are rarely reacting to your specific identity. They are reacting to their own fatigue, their own insecurities, and their own history. Realizing this allows you to put down the heavy shield of defensiveness. You do not need to internalize every cold shoulder or sharp tone. You can observe someone's difficult behavior as a weather pattern passing through their climate, rather than a judgment on yours. You are free to let them have their storm without feeling the need to get wet. Simple things matter more than complex ones. We tend to measure the value of a life by its intricacy. We admire the complex career path, the multi-layered 5-year plan, and the sophisticated social network, viewing them as the gold standard of success. We convince ourselves that happiness is a code to be cracked, a hidden treasure room that can only be unlocked through a series of difficult, intellectual maneuvers. We spend years building elaborate mental architectures, believing that the solution to our fulfillment lies in adding more rooms, more hallways, and more details. However, if you analyze the moments where you have felt most alive, the data tells a different story. The logic of the human spirit is surprisingly subtractive. The times you felt truly safe or deeply content likely involved very few moving parts. It was the sensation of cool water when you were thirsty. It was the specific relief of taking off tight shoes after a long day. It was the weight of a blanket or the silence of a house early in the morning. These simple elements are not consolation prizes for a lack of complexity. They are the load-bearing walls of your existence. Complexity requires constant maintenance. It demands your intellectual energy to keep all the spinning plates in the air. Simplicity, on the other hand, is structural. It supports you without asking for anything in return. Prioritizing the simple is not about lowering your standards. It is about recognizing the hierarchy of your own needs. You do not need to understand the geopolitical landscape to enjoy the warmth of a morning coffee. You do not need a fully resolved past to appreciate the color of the sky at dusk. The complex things give your mind something to do, but the simple things give your body a place to live. You are allowed to trust the basics. They have been keeping you alive longer than your ambitions have. Your body is always trying to keep you alive. While you are sitting perfectly still, a massive, coordinated industrial operation is taking place beneath your skin. Your white blood cells are patrolling your veins like security guards, scanning for intruders. Your liver is filtering toxins from your blood. Your heart is making micro-adjustments to its pressure based on your posture. None of these critical tasks require your supervision. They are happening simply because your biology is obsessed with your continued existence. We often develop an adversarial relationship with our bodies. We critique them in the mirror, get frustrated when they feel tired, and feel betrayed when they get sick. We treat physical discomfort as a sign that our body is failing us. But if you shift your perspective, you will see that almost every sensation is actually a form of protection. Consider the fever that keeps you in bed. That is not a malfunction. It is your body raising its internal temperature to make the environment inhospitable for a virus. Consider the adrenaline that makes your hands shake before a stressful event. That is not your nerves trying to embarrass you. It is your ancient survival system dumping fuel into your muscles so you can fight or flee. Even pain is merely a high-priority message telling you to protect an injury so it can heal. There is a profound biological loyalty here that is completely independent of your mindset. You might be having a day where you feel unworthy or ready to give up. You might criticize yourself harshly, but your cells do not share that opinion. To your heart and lungs, you are the most important thing in the universe. They will work until their absolute limit just to grant you one more breath. You are walking through life with a silent partner that fights for you every single second, proving with every heartbeat that you are worth keeping alive. Regret means you've grown. Think about the sharp sting you feel when you recall a mistake from 5 years ago. It arrives like a sudden physical blow, a wave of embarrassment or guilt over a foolish word spoken or a wrong turn taken. We habitually treat this sensation as evidence of a crime. We view it as proof that we are flawed, foolish, or broken. We prosecute our past selves with the merciless clarity of the present moment. However, this self-judgment is based on a logical fallacy. You are judging a previous version of yourself using data that you only acquired after the event took place. You are blaming a person who did not yet have the map you are currently holding. The existence of regret is actually the most reliable indicator of your growth. You can only identify a mistake if your judgment has improved since the time you made it. If you were still the same person, with the same limited perspective and the same maturity level, that past action would not bother you at all. You would look back and see nothing wrong. The pain of regret is simply the distance between who you were then and who you are now. It is the friction of your evolution. It signifies that you have outgrown the old patterns. You have developed a sharper eye, a kinder heart, or a wiser mind. Instead of letting that memory haunt you, you can view it as a marker on a wall, showing just how much taller you stand today than you did back then. You do not need to forgive your past self for being young. You simply need to thank them for surviving long enough to become the person who knows better. The world's beauty exists even when you can't access it. At this exact second, deep in the Amazon rainforest, a rare orchid is unfolding its petals in the dark. On a remote ridge in the Himalayas, the wind is carving new shapes into the snow. In a jazz club in New Orleans, a saxophonist is hitting a perfect note. These things are happening right now, in vivid color and high definition, completely independent of your ability to witness them. When you are navigating a difficult season, whether it is grief, illness, or depression, your world inevitably shrinks. Your reality contracts until it fits inside the four walls of your bedroom or the boundaries of your own mind. In this confined space, it is easy to succumb to a specific kind of tunnel vision. You begin to believe that because you are not experiencing joy, joy has ceased to exist. You mistake your disconnect from the signal for the end of the broadcast. But the world does not rely on your attention to maintain its beauty. The mechanics of wonder are self-sustaining. The sunset does not require an audience to paint the sky orange. The ocean does not need a swimmer to keep its rhythm. These things are objective realities, not subjective moods. They are a standing inventory of goodness that remains fully stocked, even when the shop is closed to you. This separation is actually a profound form of security. It means that while you are resting, healing, or simply surviving, the world is keeping the lights on for you. You do not have to carry the burden of maintaining the magic. You do not have to worry that the color will fade from the trees while you are looking away. The beauty is not a fragile thing that dissolves when you let go. It is a solid, patient reservoir. It is waiting there, fully formed and vibrant, ready for you to step back into it whenever you are ready. You can leave situations simply because you're done. There is a pervasive cultural belief that the only valid reason to leave a situation is because it has become a disaster. We act as if we need to build a legal case against our current reality before we are allowed to walk out the door. We look for evidence of toxicity, betrayal, or failure, convinced that we need a catastrophic event to justify a change in direction. We feel that as long as a situation is bearable, we are obligated to bear it. However, this mindset ignores the natural concept of expiration. Things can simply run their course without becoming hostile. You can outgrow a friendship without a fight. You can lose interest in a career path without being incompetent at it. You can move to a new city without hating the old one. The fact that a situation is not actively harming you does not mean it is the right place for you to stay. When you finish a meal, you stop eating, not because the food has suddenly turned poisonous, but simply because you are full. The utility of the experience has been exhausted. Life operates on similar cycles. Our needs and capacities evolve, and often we outpace the environments we once fit into perfectly. Staying in a situation past its expiration date is not an act of loyalty, it is an act of stagnation. It turns neutral history into resentment. Recognizing that you are done is a form of high-level awareness. It is the ability to read the credits before the lights come on. You do not need to manufacture a crisis to grant yourself permission to leave. You do not need to wait for the roof to cave in. You are allowed to simply close the door and walk away because the season has ended. Your value is inherent, not earned. However, we rarely extend this unconditional acceptance to ourselves. We have been conditioned to view our own value through a transactional lens. We treat self-worth like a salary, something that is paid out only after we have performed a service. We believe that if we are not working, helping, creating, or improving, we are somehow in debt to the universe. We feel we must earn our keep every single day, and that a day spent resting is a day where our value drops to zero. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of your nature. You are not an employee of existence. You are a manifestation of it. Your worth is a fixed property, much like your height or your eye color. It is not a variable that fluctuates based on your bank account, your relationship status, or how clean your house is today. It is inherent, meaning it is built into the material you are made of. Consider a gold coin that falls into the mud. It becomes dirty and obscured, but it does not become less valuable. Its worth is chemically locked into the metal itself, not its current location or cleanliness. You are the gold. The work you do is merely the polish. If you strip away every accomplishment, every title, and every task, you remain a complete, valuable human being. You do not need to hustle to purchase your right to be here. You were born with the deed already in your hand. What feels easy to you is often your real gift. Watch a master calligrapher draw a perfect circle. The brush moves in a single, fluid sweep that takes less than a second. To the observer, it looks incredibly simple, almost lazy. But if you were to pick up that brush, your hand would shake, the ink would blot, and the circle would come out uneven. We constantly mistake the absence of visible effort for the absence of skill. We grow up with the deep-seated belief that work is only valuable if it hurts. We equate difficulty with worth, assuming that if we aren't sweating or stressed, we aren't actually doing anything important. Because of this, you likely have a habit of discounting your most significant talents. If you can naturally diffuse a tense argument, instantly visualize how to rearrange a room, or effortlessly spot a pattern in a spreadsheet, you treat these skills as nothing. You assume that because you didn't have to suffer to learn them, they must be common to everyone. But this is a blind spot caused by your own proficiency. The things that feel like nothing to you often look like impossible to others. Your ease is not a sign that the task is trivial. It is a sign that you are naturally designed for it. You are mistaking your own expertise for simplicity. Your real purpose is rarely found in the things you have to force yourself to do. It is usually found in the things you do when you aren't even trying to impress anyone. It is the activity where time disappears and your brain stops grinding gears. We often ignore these gifts because they don't feel heavy enough to be real work. But you do not need to climb a mountain to prove you are strong if you were born with wings. The thing that feels easiest is often the thing you are meant to give to the world. Nostalgia edits out past stress. Think about a vacation you took a decade ago. You likely recall the golden sunlight on the water, the taste of a specific meal, and the feeling of freedom. You have almost certainly deleted the 4 hours you spent waiting in a humid airport terminal, the stress of a lost reservation, or the blister on your heel. Your memory acts less like a security camera recording raw footage and more like a skilled film editor creating a trailer. This editing process is a fundamental function of the human brain. We possess a biological filter that holds onto narrative peaks, the moments of high emotion or novelty, while aggressively scrubbing out the low-level friction of daily life. The boredom, the minor aches, the social awkwardness, and the background anxiety of the past eventually evaporate from the record because they are no longer useful data. The problem arises when we compare this curated, polished version of the past against the raw, unedited experience of the present. Right now, you are feeling everything in high definition. You feel the fatigue behind your eyes, the uncertainty of your bank account, and the irritation of a slow internet connection. When you look back at better times, you are comparing a finished movie to a chaotic film set. You assume life was easier then, but in reality, you just aren't carrying the weight of that era's stress anymore. Realizing this breaks the spell of nostalgia. The good old days were filled with just as much mundane struggle and confusion as today. You have simply survived them long enough to forget the texture of the difficulty. You are not living in a decline. You are simply living in the present, which is the only time that ever feels difficult, because it is the only time that is actually real. 10 years from now, your brain will have edited this difficult week into a fond memory too. Old survival habits may no longer be needed. Imagine a soldier who returns home from a long conflict but refuses to take off their heavy armor. They sit at their kitchen table, fully plated in steel, ready to fight at a second's notice. To an observer, this looks exhausting and unnecessary, but to the soldier, that weight feels like the only thing keeping them safe. They have forgotten what it feels like to simply wear a shirt. This is exactly how emotional survival mechanisms operate. At some point in your history, you likely navigated an environment where you had to be hyper-vigilant to get through the day. Maybe you had to be perfectly quiet to avoid angering a volatile parent. Maybe you had to be aggressive to be heard in a chaotic classroom. Or perhaps you had to become a perfectionist to avoid harsh criticism. Your brain codified these behaviors not as choices, but as essential laws of survival. It learned that being invisible or always saying yes was the price of admission for safety. But environments usually change faster than reflexes do. You are likely no longer in that restrictive house, that dangerous relationship, or that precarious financial situation. You are standing in a safe, open room, yet you are still crouching as if you are under fire. The anxiety you feel, the urge to over-explain every decision, the compulsion to please everyone, or the reflex to hide your true feelings, is not a reaction to your present life. It is an echo from a previous chapter. Recognizing this mismatch is the first step to putting the heavy gear down. You do not need to dismantle your defenses all at once. You can simply acknowledge that the shield you are gripping so tightly was designed for a battle you have already won. The war is over. The threat has passed. You are allowed to trust the peace you have found, and you are allowed to finally walk through your life with your hands free. Emptiness is just quiet, not danger. If you hold a cup that is filled to the very brim, it is impossible to add anything new to it. The fullness, which we often prize as a sign of abundance, is actually a state of stagnation. To receive something fresh, whether it is water, wine, or tea, you first need the vessel to be empty. We intuitively understand this physics when it comes to kitchenware, yet we treat internal emptiness as a spiritual emergency. When we feel a lack of distinct emotion, purpose, or activity, we tend to interpret it as a signal that something has gone wrong. We view the void as a vacuum that will consume us if we don't immediately feed it with noise, digital distractions, or busyness. We have conditioned ourselves to equate being okay with being occupied, causing us to treat silence like a predator that must be kept at bay. However, if you look at the natural world, emptiness is never a danger. It is merely a state of receptivity. The hollow space inside a guitar is exactly what allows it to amplify music. The empty space in a room is what makes it habitable and allows you to move freely. Emptiness is not the absence of life. It is the prerequisite for it. It is the necessary pause between the exhale and the inhale. You're not responsible for outdated versions of yourself. We tend to measure the value of a life by its intricacy. We admire the complex career path, the multi-layered 5-year plan, and the sophisticated social network, viewing them as the gold standard of success. We convince ourselves that happiness is a code to be cracked, a hidden treasure room that can only be unlocked through a series of difficult intellectual maneuvers. We spend years building elaborate mental architectures, believing that the solution to our fulfillment lies in adding more rooms, more hallways, and more details. However, if you analyze the moments where you have felt most alive, the data tells a different story. The logic of the human spirit is surprisingly subtractive. The times you felt truly safe or deeply content likely involved very few moving parts. It was the sensation of cool water when you were thirsty. It was the specific relief of taking off tight shoes after a long day. It was the weight of a blanket or the silence of a house early in the morning. These simple elements are not consolation prizes for a lack of complexity. They are the load-bearing walls of your existence. Complexity requires constant maintenance. It demands your intellectual energy to keep all the spinning plates in the air. Simplicity, on the other hand, is structural. It supports you without asking for anything in return. Prioritizing the simple is not about lowering your standards. It is about recognizing the hierarchy of your own needs. You do not need to understand the geopolitical landscape to enjoy the warmth of a morning coffee. You do not need a fully resolved past to appreciate the color of the sky at dusk. The complex things give your mind something to do, but the simple things give your body a place to live. You are allowed to trust the basics. They have been keeping you alive longer than your ambitions have. Others see you as steadier than you feel. When you look at a large ship moving across the horizon, it appears to be gliding with effortless grace. It looks solid, intentional, and entirely composed. But if you were to step below the deck, you would find a different story. You would see engines churning at high heat, pipes vibrating under pressure, and a crew constantly adjusting to the swell of the tide. The internal chaos is invisible to the shore. All the world sees is the steady progress of the vessel. We live our lives from the perspective of the engine room. You are intimately aware of your own internal vibrations, your second-guessing, your morning anxieties, and the frantic effort it takes just to keep your schedule on track. Because you can feel the heat of your own gears, you assume that everyone else can see it too. You walk into a room convinced that your uncertainty is written across your forehead in neon lights. However, human perception is naturally filtered. Other people do not have access to your internal monologue. They only have access to your output. When they look at you, they aren't seeing your racing heart or your messy mental drafts. They see the person who showed up, the colleague who finished the report, or the friend who offered a thoughtful word. To them, you aren't a collection of insecurities. You are a consistent, reliable presence. This gap between how we feel and how we are seen is a universal constant. The person you admire for their perfect composure is likely feeling the same internal tremors that you are. We are all projecting an image of stability while managing an internal storm. Realizing this allows you to stop worrying that you are faking it. You aren't pretending to be steady. You are simply experiencing the natural friction of being alive. You can trust the version of you that others see. They aren't missing the truth. They are just seeing the ship instead of the engine. Discomfort often means you're doing something meaningful. If you watch a lobster as it grows, you will notice a recurring period of extreme vulnerability. As its body expands, its hard, protective shell becomes agonizingly tight. To survive, the lobster must crawl under a rock, shed its only defense, and endure the raw friction of the ocean while it waits for a larger shell to harden. If the lobster chose to avoid that discomfort, it would eventually be crushed by its own casing. The pain isn't a sign of disease. It's the physical proof of expansion. We often misinterpret our own internal friction in the same way. When we start a new project, enter a deep relationship, or challenge a long-held belief, we usually encounter a sharp sense of unease. We feel exposed, clumsy, and uncertain. Our instinct is to treat this discomfort as a red flag, a warning from our brain that we've made a mistake and should immediately retreat to the safety of what we already know. We equate feeling bad with doing bad. However, meaningful work and personal growth almost never feel comfortable in the beginning. Comfort is the sensation of a finished product. It is the feeling of a habit that no longer requires effort. Meaning, on the other hand, requires you to stretch your current boundaries. It demands that you operate in the space where your old skills end and your new ones begin. That tight feeling in your chest is often just the sensation of your old shell becoming too small for the person you are becoming. When you feel that urge to pull back because things are getting hard, try to view the tension as a compass. It is usually pointing exactly toward the things that matter most. You aren't struggling because you are failing. You are struggling because you are engaged. The discomfort is just the sound of the gears turning. There is always more space than you think. When you look at a brick wall, it appears to be a solid, impenetrable mass of matter. It looks like there is no room for anything else to exist within that space. But if you were to zoom in with a powerful lens, the image would change entirely. You would see that the atoms making up that brick are mostly composed of vast, empty distances. Even the things we perceive as the most crowded and finished are, at their core, mostly open space. We often apply this solid wall logic to our own lives. We look at our schedules, our relationships, or our mental capacity and conclude that we are completely full. We feel that every square inch of our identity has been claimed by responsibilities, past mistakes, or current anxieties. We move through our days with a sense of claustrophobia, convinced that there is no room left for a new hobby, a different perspective, or a sudden moment of joy. We feel like a glass that has already been filled to the brim. However, the human experience is not a container with a fixed volume. It is more like a coastline. No matter how many waves crash against the shore, there is always more sand, more horizon, and more sky. When you feel stuck, it is usually because you are focusing on the narrowness of the path immediately in front of you. You are looking at the fence instead of the field behind it. The truth is that your capacity for change is much wider than your current circumstances suggest. There is always space to breathe between two difficult thoughts. There is always a hidden pocket of time in a busy day. There is always room to change your mind about who you are. You aren't a finished drawing. You are a canvas that is constantly expanding. You can stop worrying that you've run out of room. The horizon isn't a boundary. It's just the limit of your current view. Strengths become flaws only in the wrong context. Consider a high-powered lighthouse beam. Out on a rocky coastline during a storm, that light is a miracle. It is a focused, unyielding force that saves lives by cutting through the darkness. But if you took that same lighthouse and placed it in the middle of a quiet neighborhood at midnight, it would be considered a nuisance. The light hasn't changed its nature. It hasn't become bad or broken. It is simply a specialized tool operating in the wrong environment. We often spend a great deal of time criticizing our own personality traits as if they are fundamental defects. You might beat yourself up for being too stubborn, too sensitive, or too obsessed with tiny details. You look at these qualities as heavy weights that you need to shed in order to be a better person. You treat your character like a list of bugs in a software program that need to be patched out. However, a flaw is almost always just a strength being applied to a situation that doesn't require it. Stubbornness is just persistence in an environment that demands flexibility. Sensitivity is just a high-functioning empathy system operating in a space that is too loud or harsh. Your obsession with detail is the exact quality that makes you a great editor or a reliable friend, even if it makes you a slow decision-maker at a restaurant. When you feel frustrated with yourself, stop asking what is wrong with your character and start looking at the room you are standing in. You aren't a collection of mistakes, you are a set of highly specific instruments. A hammer is a failure at turning a screw. But that doesn't mean the hammer is a bad tool. It just means it's being asked to do the wrong job. You don't need to change who you are. You just need to find the coastline where your specific light is exactly what the world is looking for. You carry pieces of everyone you've loved. Think about a specific phrase you use when you're surprised, or the unique way you fold your laundry, or even a sudden craving for a dish you didn't like 10 years ago. If you trace these small habits back to their source, you'll rarely find that you invented them. Instead, you'll find the thumbprints of other people. You are a living library of everyone who has ever mattered to you, composed of thousands of borrowed fragments that have settled into the foundation of who you are. We often view the end of a relationship, whether a friendship fades or a loved one passes away, as a total loss. We feel as though a chapter has been ripped out of our book, leaving us lighter and emptier than before. We focus on the absence, the empty chair, or the silent phone, mourning the connection as if it has vanished completely from the physical world. But human influence doesn't work like a footprint in the sand that washes away with the next tide. It works more like a graft on a tree. When you spend time with someone, you subconsciously harvest the best parts of their perspective. You inherit a friend's sense of humor, a mentor's work ethic, or a partner's taste in music. You carry the way your grandmother handled a crisis and the way a childhood friend made you feel brave. These traits are not just memories. They are active parts of your current identity. They have become integrated into your speech, your gestures, and your values. This means that no one ever truly leaves you empty-handed. You are never starting from scratch, even after a great loss. You are a beautiful walking mosaic of every kindness, every lesson, and every laugh you've shared with others. You are not just yourself. You are a continuation of everyone you have ever loved. Power only exists in the present moment. If you try to pick up a heavy stone that you dropped yesterday, your hands will find only empty air. If you try to brace yourself against a gust of wind that won't arrive until next Tuesday, you will find yourself pushing against nothing. We spend a vast amount of our mental energy trying to exert force on time periods that are physically inaccessible to us. We treat the past and the future as if they are rooms we are currently standing in, unaware that we are essentially trying to move furniture in a dream. Our anxiety often stems from the feeling of being powerless. We feel small because we cannot go back and rewrite a conversation from 3 years ago, or because we cannot guarantee the outcome of a meeting 3 months away. We look at the vast expanse of our history and our destiny and feel overwhelmed by how much of it is out of our control. We mistake this inability to change the unchangeable for a lack of personal agency. However, power is not a reservoir that is spread out across your entire timeline. It is a concentrated point, much like the tip of a pen. It only exists at the exact coordinate where your mind and your body meet, right now. You cannot change the person you were, and you cannot force the person you will become, but you have absolute sovereignty over the choice you are making in this specific breath. This realization is the ultimate relief. It means you can stop trying to carry the weight of your whole life at once. You don't need to solve the problems of next year. You only need to navigate the next 10 minutes. When you pull your attention back from the was and the will be, you find that your influence is actually quite sharp and effective. You are no longer shouting into the past or reaching into the fog. You are simply standing on the only ground that can actually support your weight. You don't need to be understood to be loved. Consider the relationship between a person and a sun-drenched garden. The flowers do not understand the complexities of human biology, and the person likely cannot explain the intricate chemistry of photosynthesis. There is a total lack of intellectual data being exchanged between the two. Yet, the person tends to the soil with care, and the garden offers its scent and colour in return. They are in a state of mutual support, even though their internal worlds are completely alien to one another. We often operate under the stressful assumption that love is the final prize of a successful interrogation. We feel a desperate need to explain every corner of our minds to the people we care about, believing that if they don't grasp the why behind our every mood, or the exact logic of our fears, they cannot truly care for us. We treat being understood as the prerequisite for being accepted, which turns our relationships into a never-ending series of depositions. However, the human heart is far more generous than the human intellect. Connection doesn't happen because two people have successfully downloaded each other's operating systems. It happens because of a presence. Someone can witness your sadness without knowing its history and still hold your hand. They can appreciate your enthusiasm for a hobby they find baffling, simply because they enjoy seeing you light up. In fact, the most profound forms of care usually happen in the gaps where words fail. Love is a choice to stand by someone, not a certificate of completion for a personality test. You are allowed to be a mystery, even to those closest to you. You do not have to be a solved puzzle to be a cherished one. The people who truly matter are not looking for an explanation. They are just looking for you. Life isn't a performance. If you walk through a forest, you will notice that the trees are not trying to be impressive. The moss growing on a damp stone isn't checking to see if it has an audience, and the river doesn't speed up because someone is watching from the bank. These elements of nature are simply existing in their own time, fulfilling their own functions without any regard for how they are perceived. They are not on stage, they are just alive. We, however, often spend our lives as if we are standing under a permanent spotlight. We move through our days with an invisible audience in the back of our minds, constantly grading our performance. We curate our conversations, manage our body language, and filter our joys through the lens of how they might look to a stranger. We treat our lives like a production where the primary goal is to receive a standing ovation from people we don't even know. This constant state of being on is exhausting because it turns every moment into a task. When life is a performance, a quiet afternoon feels like a missed opportunity to be productive, and a mistake feels like a public failure. We become so focused on the reviews that we forget to enjoy the play. The comforting truth is that the audience we fear is mostly a fiction. Other people are far too busy managing their own internal spotlights to spend much time analyzing yours. When you realize that no one is holding a scorecard, the pressure to be perfect or interesting simply evaporates. You are not a character in a movie. You are a biological being with the right to be messy, quiet, and unoptimized. You can stop hitting your marks and start just being here. Life is not a show to be watched. It is an experience to be felt. Exhaustion is a boundary, not a weakness. We often fail to see our own exhaustion with this same mechanical logic. When we find ourselves unable to focus, lacking the energy to socialize, or simply needing to sit in a quiet room, we tend to treat it as a moral failing. We look at our fatigue as a crack in our character, a sign that we aren't as strong or as resilient as we ought to be. We treat our desire to rest as a flaw that needs to be overcome with more caffeine or more willpower. However, exhaustion is not a sign of fragility. It is your body's most honest boundary. It is a sophisticated internal sensor that monitors your reserves of emotional and physical energy. When that sensor goes off, it is providing you with vital data about your current capacity. It is letting you know that you have reached the edge of what is sustainable. Pushing through this signal isn't a show of strength. It's an act of ignoring your own internal safety protocols. When you respect your exhaustion, you aren't admitting defeat. You are acknowledging the reality of being a living, breathing creature with finite resources. A boundary is simply a line that defines where one thing ends and another begins. Your exhaustion is the line that defines your limits for today. By honoring that line, you aren't becoming weaker. You are ensuring that you have the foundation to be strong again tomorrow. No problem lasts forever. Consider a high-powered lighthouse beam. Out on a rocky coastline during a storm, that light is a miracle. It is a focused, unyielding force that saves lives by cutting through the darkness. But if you took that same lighthouse and placed it in the middle of a quiet neighborhood at midnight, it would be considered a nuisance. The light hasn't changed its nature. It hasn't become bad or broken. It is simply a specialized tool operating in the wrong environment. We often spend a great deal of time criticizing our own personality traits as if they are fundamental defects. You might beat yourself up for being too stubborn, too sensitive, or too obsessed with tiny details. You look at these qualities as heavy weights that you need to shed in order to be a better person. You treat your character like a list of bugs in a software program that need to be patched out. However, a flaw is almost always just a strength being applied to a situation that doesn't require it. Stubbornness is just persistence in an environment that demands flexibility. Sensitivity is just a high-functioning empathy system operating in a space that is too loud or harsh. Your obsession with detail is the exact quality that makes you a great editor or a reliable friend, even if it makes you a slow decision maker at a restaurant. When you feel frustrated with yourself, stop asking what is wrong with your character and start looking at the room you are standing in. You aren't a collection of mistakes. You are a set of highly specific instruments. A hammer is a failure at turning a screw, but that doesn't mean the hammer is a bad tool. It just means it's being asked to do the wrong job. You don't need to change who you are. You just need to find the coastline where your specific light is exactly what the world is looking for. Would you like me to continue with a script for the next truth? Perhaps focusing on growth is often a quiet, private event. Your presence affects the world, even quietly. A single pebble dropped into a wide, still lake does not sink in silence. Even if the stone is tiny and the water is vast, the moment of impact creates a series of concentric circles that move outward in every direction. The pebble doesn't have to try to be influential. It doesn't have to shout or splash violently. By simply existing and entering the water, it fundamentally alters the surface of the entire lake. The ripples eventually reach the furthest shore, touching reeds and moving grains of sand that the pebble will never see. We often fall into the trap of believing that only loud, visible actions count as having an impact. We look at world leaders, famous creators, or activists, and assume that unless we are moving mountains or commanding the attention of millions, our presence is neutral. We walk through our days feeling like ghosts, convinced that we are leaving the world exactly as we found it. But human influence is more like a subtle scent than a loud noise. Your presence in a room changes the atmospheric pressure for everyone else in it. A quiet smile offered to a cashier, the way you patiently hold a door, or even the calm energy you bring to a stressful meeting acts as a silent signal to those around you. You are constantly providing a data point for others on how to be, how to react, and how to coexist. This means you don't have to do something monumental to be meaningful. You are a living part of an interconnected web. When you are kind to yourself, you make it slightly easier for others to be kind to themselves. When you stay calm, you lower the collective anxiety of the space you occupy. You are a constant contributor to the world's emotional climate. Even in your quietest moments, you are the pebble in the lake, and your ripples are reaching further than you can possibly imagine. Anxiety is memory, not prediction. If you walk into a kitchen and smell smoke, your heart immediately begins to race. Your body prepares for a fire before your brain even has a chance to look at the stove. Most of the time, this reaction is helpful, but imagine if your brain had once experienced a kitchen fire years ago. Now, every time you see a toaster or smell a match, your body goes into a full-scale emergency response. The alarm is loud and terrifying, but there is no fire in the room. You aren't smelling the future, you are smelling a ghost. This is the fundamental mechanics of anxiety. We often treat that cold, sinking feeling in our stomach as if it were a weather report for our future. When we feel anxious about a new job, a social gathering, or a difficult conversation, we assume our brain is accurately predicting a disaster. We believe the feeling is a warning of what is about to happen. However, anxiety is almost never a psychic ability. Instead, it is your internal library of past experiences being pulled off the shelf all at once. When you face an uncertain situation, your brain frantically searches its history for a time when things went wrong. It finds a memory of embarrassment, failure, or hurt, and plays the emotional audio of that moment at full volume. It is trying to protect you from a past event by dressing it up as a future threat. Realizing that anxiety is a historian, not a prophet, changes everything. It means the physical sensation of dread isn't a signal that something bad is coming. It's just a reminder that something bad once happened. You are not witnessing a rehearsal of a future failure. You are just hearing the echoes of an old defense mechanism. You can acknowledge the noise without believing the forecast. The alarm is just a memory, and you are safely in the present. Meaning is felt, not defined. If you take a piece of music apart to study it, you will find nothing but vibrations, mathematical intervals, and silent gaps. You can measure the frequency of a note or the duration of a rest, but you will never find the beauty hidden inside the physics. No matter how deeply you analyze the sheet music, the feeling of a song that makes you want to dance or cry cannot be located under a microscope. It only exists in the moment the sound reaches your ears and moves something inside you. We often approach our lives like scientists trying to find a hidden formula for meaning. We look at our careers, our hobbies, and our relationships as if they are puzzles that need to be solved. We wait for a grand realization or a written definition to tell us that what we are doing matters. We treat meaning like a destination we will reach once we have checked enough boxes or found the right explanation for our existence. But meaning is not a definition you arrive at. It is a physical sensation you experience. It is the sudden warmth you feel when you help a friend, the quiet satisfaction of finishing a difficult task, or the inexplicable sense of peace that comes from watching a sunset. These moments do not need to be justified by logic or recorded in a mission statement to be real. They are valid simply because they were felt. When you stop trying to define your purpose and start paying attention to what resonates with you, the world becomes much simpler. You don't need to have a grand theory for why your life is significant. If a conversation makes you feel seen, or a project makes you feel curious, that is the meaning. It is the resonance, not the reasoning. You are the instrument, and your feelings are the proof that the music is playing. You're not a problem to be fixed. Consider a winding river that twists around large boulders and curves through narrow canyons. We don't look at the bend in the water and call it a mistake. We don't look at the jagged edge of the rock and call it a failure. We recognize that the river is simply responding to the terrain it has traveled. It is a continuous, flowing process that adapts to its environment. The water isn't trying to reach a state of perfect straightness. It is just being a river. We often fail to give ourselves this same grace. We have been conditioned to view our personalities as projects and our struggles as broken parts. We consume endless advice on how to be more productive, more confident, or more disciplined, as if we are a piece of faulty machinery that just needs the right replacement part to finally run smoothly. We treat our quirks, our anxieties, and our changing moods like bugs in a system that must be patched out. This perspective turns our daily existence into a never-ending repair job. However, the human experience is not a mechanical puzzle. You are a biological being, and like the river, your current shape is a natural response to the life you have lived. Your sensitivity might be a response to a loud world, and your caution might be the result of a difficult past. These aren't defects, they are adaptations. You are a living system that is constantly learning and shifting, not a static object that has been damaged. When you stop viewing yourself as a problem, you stop waiting for a future version of you to finally be correct. You realize that growth is not about fixing what is broken, but about tending to what is alive. You are allowed to exist in your current form without a checklist of improvements. You aren't a broken machine, you are a whole person, and you have been enough all along. Guilt often means you care more than you can handle. If you try to hold a massive reservoir of water behind a small wooden dam, the wood will eventually groan and crack under the pressure. The cracking sounds are not a sign that the wood is malicious or failing at its job. It is simply the physical result of an object being asked to hold more weight than its structural limits allow. The sound is the evidence of the pressure, not a lack of effort. We often experience guilt as a moral failure, a heavy internal voice telling us that we haven't done enough, or been enough for the people around us. We feel it when we can't solve a friend's crisis, when we miss a family event, or when we simply run out of energy to be the perfect support system. We interpret this gnawing feeling as proof that we are selfish or uncaring, believing that if we truly loved someone, we wouldn't feel this way. However, the reality is usually the exact opposite. Guilt is the friction that occurs when your desire to help exceeds your actual capacity. You only feel the weight of what you haven't done because your empathy has already promised more than your time, energy, or resources can deliver. A person who truly didn't care wouldn't feel the sting of guilt. They would simply walk away without a second thought. The very existence of that heavy feeling is proof of your deep commitment. Recognizing this doesn't make the feeling disappear, but it changes what the feeling means. Guilt is not a sign that you are a bad person. It is a sign that you have a heart that is bigger than your schedule. It is a signal that you have reached the edge of your human limits. You can stop using your guilt as a whip and start seeing it as a tribute to how much you genuinely care. You aren't failing. You are just carrying a heavy load, and it is okay to acknowledge that the weight is real. Your limits give your life shape. If you pour water onto a flat, endless table, it simply spreads out into a thin, directionless puddle. It has no depth, no path, and no power. But if you place that same water within the high, narrow banks of a stone canyon, it becomes a river. It gains a direction, a rhythm, and the strength to move toward the sea. The water is only able to become something meaningful because it has encountered a set of firm boundaries that refuse to move. We tend to view our personal limits as a series of unfortunate cages. We look at our lack of time, our physical exhaustion, or our specific set of talents and see them as obstacles to our potential. We imagine that if we were only limitless, if we had infinite energy and zero restrictions, we would finally be our best selves. We treat our no and our cannot as failures, believing that every boundary is a missed opportunity. However, a life without limits is not a masterpiece. It is a blur. Just as a painting requires the edges of a canvas to become a focused image, your life requires constraints to gain a recognizable form. Your decision to say no to one path is exactly what gives the path you are on its definition. If you were everywhere at once, you would effectively be nowhere. By choosing to commit your limited energy to a specific person, a single craft, or a particular place, you transform a vague existence into a solid identity. Your limits are not signs of weakness. They are the architectural lines of your character. They force you to prioritize what truly matters and to go deep instead of just spreading thin. When you accept that you cannot do everything, you finally gain the freedom to do something exceptionally well. You aren't being restricted by your boundaries. You are being shaped by them into something singular, purposeful, and rare. Wanting more is often wanting now. If you watch a child waiting for a birthday to arrive, you see a specific kind of agony. To them, the gap between today and the celebration feels like an endless desert. They don't actually want a bigger party or more expensive gifts. They just want the distance between their current self and the joy to disappear. They are not suffering from a lack of things, but from a collision with the slow, steady pace of time. As adults, we experience this same friction, but we mislabel it. We look at our lives and feel a sharp, gnawing hunger for more. We assume this means we need a larger house, a more prestigious title, or a higher number in a bank account. We convince ourselves that our dissatisfaction is a volume problem, that we are simply missing pieces of the puzzle. We begin a frantic search for the missing parts, believing that the next acquisition will finally settle the restlessness in our chests. However, If you look closer at that hunger, you'll often find it isn't about the what, but about the when. Most of the time, we aren't actually lacking the things we need for a good life. We are just waiting for our current efforts to bear fruit. We are in the middle of a process that requires patience, and our ego interprets that waiting period as a deficiency. We mistake the quiet space of growth for a void that needs to be filled with more stuff. This realization changes the way we view our ambitions. Wanting more is often just a symptom of being uncomfortable with the present moment. It is a desire to skip the middle chapters of the book and jump to the ending. When you recognize that your hunger is actually just impatience, the pressure to get more begins to lift. You aren't empty, you are just in transit. You can stop trying to fill a hole that doesn't exist and simply allow the clock to do its work. Loneliness is a signal, not a verdict. When you feel a sharp pang of hunger in the middle of the afternoon, you don't usually interpret it as a sign that you are a failure or that you will never eat again. You recognize it as a simple physical message from your body indicating that your fuel levels are low. You don't judge the sensation, you just look for a snack. We have a very practical relationship with most of our internal alarms, yet when the signal is loneliness, we tend to treat it like a final sentence on our character. We often view loneliness as a heavy, permanent shadow, a proof that we are fundamentally unlovable or that we have been cast out from the group. We spiral into a narrative of always and never, believing that the quiet in the room is a reflection of our worth. We treat the feeling as a verdict, a final report card on our social standing. But biologically, loneliness is no more of a judgment than thirst is. It is a sophisticated survival mechanism designed by evolution to keep us safe. Millions of years ago, being alone was dangerous, so our brains developed a specialized alarm to nudge us back toward the tribe. Loneliness is simply your internal navigation system noticing a gap in connection and sounding a polite chime to let you know. It is a biological request for companionship, not a commentary on your value. When you shift your perspective to see loneliness as a signal rather than a verdict, the weight of it begins to change. It is not a hole you have fallen into. It is a dashboard light telling you to pull over and check your social battery. It is an invitation to reach out, to rejoin the world, or even to reconnect with yourself. You are not broken for feeling it. You are simply a social creature with a very healthy, very loud heart that is reminding you of its needs. Lost time was often processing time. If you watch a field of soil in the middle of winter, it looks like a picture of total failure. Nothing is growing, no fruit is appearing, and there is no visible sign of life or progress. To a casual observer, those months of frozen silence look like lost time. But beneath the surface, the soil is actually performing a complex chemical reset. It is breaking down old matter, balancing its nutrients, and gathering the energy it needs for the explosion of green that only comes in the spring. Without that period of apparent nothingness, the growth would be impossible. We tend to be much harder on ourselves than we are on the seasons. We look back at a year spent in a stagnant job, a long period of grieving, or a month spent sitting on the couch, and we label it as wasted. We tally up the hours we weren't producing or achieving and view them as a hole in our biography, a debt we can never repay. We treat our lives like a race where every second not spent moving forward is a second lost forever. However, the human mind is not a machine that can be toggled on and off. It is a biological system that requires immense amounts of background energy to handle change. Much of what we call wasted time is actually essential processing time. When you were doing nothing, your brain was likely sorting through a difficult loss, decompressing from a trauma, or slowly building the resolve to make a major life change. You weren't being lazy, you were incubating. Just as a computer needs time to install an update before it can run new software, you needed that quiet, unproductive gap to integrate your experiences. You didn't lose that time. You spent it on the invisible work of becoming the person who is finally ready to move again. Darkness comes from focus, not absence of light. If you stand in a dark room and switch on a powerful flashlight, you create a sharp, bright circle on the wall. But in doing so, you also make the rest of the room feel much darker than it did before. The light hasn't actually removed the objects in the corners. It has simply trained your eyes to ignore them. By narrowing your vision to a single point, the surrounding environment effectively disappears. We often experience this same phenomenon in our emotional lives. When we are overwhelmed by a specific worry, a recent failure, or a deep sadness, that one thing becomes our flashlight. It is so bright and so demanding of our attention that everything else in our life, our successes, our small comforts, the people who love us, seems to vanish into a deep, impenetrable blackness. We begin to believe that the light has gone out of the world entirely, when in reality, we are simply staring too hard at the shadows. This kind of darkness is not a void or an ending. It is a byproduct of intense focus. Your brain is a highly efficient machine that prioritizes what it thinks is the most urgent data. If you are fixated on a problem, your mind will dim everything else to save energy for that one task. The darkness you feel is actually a sign of how hard your mind is working to protect you or solve a crisis. The comfort lies in remembering that the room is still there. Your capacity for joy hasn't been erased. It is just currently out of focus. You don't have to manufacture new light to fix your life. You often just need to widen your lens. By consciously looking away from the glare of your current struggle, you'll find that the world is still fully illuminated, waiting for your eyes to readjust to the glow that was there all along. Being unimportant to others can be deeply freeing. If you watch a flock of birds bank and turn in the sky, you'll notice that no single bird is the center of attention. They move together, but each individual is essentially anonymous to the casual observer on the ground. This lack of scrutiny isn't a tragedy. It is what allows the birds to fly with such effortless, unself-conscious grace. They are not performing for the clouds, and they are not worried about whether the trees find their flight patterns impressive. We often spend our lives terrified of being unimportant. We have been conditioned to believe that the ultimate goal of a human life is to be noticed, remembered, and deeply significant to as many people as possible. We treat our reputation like a fragile glass sculpture that we must carry through a crowded room, constantly worried that a single stumble will draw the judgmental eyes of the world. We feel a heavy obligation to be interesting, successful, and relevant at all times. But there is a profound, quiet relief in realizing that you are actually a background character in almost everyone else's story. Most people are far too occupied with their own internal dramas, their own bills, their own heartaches, and their own mirrors, to spend much time scrutinizing your choices. Your fashion mistakes, your awkward silences, and your career pivots are rarely more than a passing thought to the people around you. This realization is not an insult, it is a key. If you are not the center of the universe, you are finally free to stop performing for it. You can take risks, make mistakes, and change your mind without the weight of an audience's expectations. You are allowed to be average, to be quiet, and to simply exist for your own sake. Being unimportant means the stage lights have been turned off, leaving you in the comfortable, private darkness where you can finally be exactly who you are when no one is watching. Never give up. This is one of those kind of advice that shows up everywhere, in graduation speeches, on motivational posters, and in the final minutes of sports movies. The message is clear. If you just keep pushing, success will come. And for certain situations, that persistence really does matter. Learning a new skill, building a career, recovering from a setback, these all take time and resilience. But as a one-size-fits-all rule, never give up can be misleading. Not all paths are worth sticking to. Sometimes quitting is actually the smart choice. There's a well-known psychological trap called the sunk cost fallacy. It's the idea that the more time, money, or effort we've already spent on something, the harder it is to walk away, even if it's clearly not working. People stay in failing business ventures because they've already invested years. Or they stick with degrees they no longer care about because they're almost done. The more you've given, the more pressure you feel to see it through, even when the payoff no longer makes sense. The problem is, effort alone doesn't guarantee results. Sticking with something just because you started it can waste resources and delay better opportunities. It's not always about grinding harder. Sometimes it's about recognizing when a change is needed. There's a difference between giving up too soon and knowing when to redirect your energy. Smart quitting isn't laziness. It's a form of strategy. It means recognizing dead ends, cutting losses, and making room for something that might work better. Never give up sounds inspiring, but real progress depends on more than determination. It depends on perspective, the ability to tell the difference between a challenge worth pushing through and a path worth leaving behind. Everything happens for a reason. A car swerves, a job offer falls through, someone you trust walks away. In the moment, it feels senseless, like life is just tossing events at random. But soon after, people start telling stories. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was the universe closing one door so another could open. We crave patterns, explanations, some thread to tie it all together. This is where a popular idea quietly steps in. The belief that every event, no matter how painful, has a deeper purpose. It doesn't ask for proof. It just soothes. And for many, that comfort is enough. But here's the catch. Not every event carries a hidden message. A child gets sick. A business collapses. A natural disaster strikes. Sometimes, bad things happen without any larger narrative. The human brain, however, doesn't like gaps. When randomness enters our lives, we instinctively reach for meaning. Psychologists call this pattern-seeking behavior, and it's deeply rooted in how we cope. There's a difference between making meaning and assuming meaning was already there. You can choose to grow after something awful. You can learn, adapt, recover. But that's not the same as saying it was meant to be. One is an active response. The other is a passive assumption. The danger lies in that passivity. Believing everything happens for a reason can lead to inaction, staying in toxic relationships, delaying decisions, or waiting for life to sort itself out. It can also cause people to rationalize injustice or blame victims, trying to fit every tragedy into a tidy moral arc. Not everything is part of a grand plan, but that doesn't mean you're powerless. Meaning isn't always found. Sometimes it's built, deliberately, in the aftermath. And that's a different kind of strength. No risk, no reward. This advice promises boldness that will unlock your dreams. It sounds simple. If you don't step out of your comfort zone, you'll never get ahead. But the truth about risk-taking is much more nuanced than just diving in and hoping for the best. Taking a risk means doing something uncertain, starting a business, changing careers, moving to a new place, or speaking up when it's hard. The idea behind it is clear. No risk, no reward. Playing it safe can mean missed chances and future regrets. Yet not all risks are created equal. Glorifying risk without considering your situation ignores important factors like your responsibilities, resources, and timing. Some risks aren't brave, they're reckless. What separates smart risk-taking from harmful gambles is preparation. A good risk is calculated. It involves weighing possible outcomes, planning for setbacks, and reducing unnecessary harm. For example, before quitting a stable job to launch a business, someone might save money, build a plan, and test their idea. That kind of risk is thoughtful, not impulsive. Psychologists call this intelligent risk-taking. It means understanding both the dangers and the opportunities, while honestly knowing how much uncertainty you can handle. People respond differently. Some thrive on pressure, others don't. The goal isn't to avoid risk or chase it blindly. Growth, change, and learning almost always come with uncertainty. What truly matters is how you face that uncertainty. Taking risks with awareness and strategy is what leads to real progress and meaningful rewards. Opposites attract. One person is loud and outgoing. The other is quiet and reserved. They meet, and it just works, or so the story goes. The idea that opposites attract is one of the most familiar explanations for why unlikely pairs end up together. But when you look at the research and real-world outcomes, the picture gets more complicated. At its core, the phrase suggests that people are drawn to traits they don't have. An organized person might be attracted to someone spontaneous. A dreamer might feel grounded by a realist. And in some ways, this does happen. When two people complement each other, balancing strengths and weaknesses, it can create a sense of harmony. One partner handles planning, the other brings flexibility. One is detail-oriented, the other sees the big picture. But the phrase also oversimplifies how attraction actually works. Studies show that, more often than not, people tend to pair up with those who are similar, not opposite. Shared values, interests, communication styles, and life goals tend to build stronger, longer-lasting connections. Similarity makes things easier. It reduces conflict, increases understanding, and creates a sense of being seen. Where opposites attract tends to hold up is in short-term chemistry. People might be intrigued by someone very different, especially at first. But over time, extreme differences, especially in areas like communication, emotional needs, or conflict resolution, can become sources of tension. Opposites can attract, but they often need extra effort to make the relationship function long-term. So while the idea sounds exciting, it's not a universal rule. Compatibility is less about having different traits and more about how two people handle those differences. What matters most isn't whether you're alike or opposite. It's whether the dynamic you create together actually works. Nice guys finish last. Some people believe being kind is a disadvantage. That if you're too nice, you'll get overlooked, taken advantage of, or left behind. This idea is often summed up in a blunt phrase: nice guys finish last. At face value, it sounds like a warning against being soft in a competitive world. The logic is that if you're always putting others first, avoiding conflict, or trying to please everyone, you'll miss out on opportunities. In business, relationships, or even social circles, assertive people are often seen as the ones who get ahead. They speak up, take charge, and don't hesitate to ask for what they want. But being nice can mean a lot of different things. If it means being respectful, cooperative, or compassionate, then those are qualities that often help people succeed, especially in long-term relationships or team settings. Research in psychology actually shows that people high in agreeableness are more likely to build trust, resolve conflicts, and maintain strong networks. The problem isn't kindness. It's when niceness is paired with passivity. When someone avoids setting boundaries, never says no, or hides what they really think to keep others happy, it can lead to being ignored or undervalued. In that sense, finishing last isn't about being nice. It's about not standing up for yourself. Many successful people are both kind and assertive. They care about others, but they also communicate their needs clearly and take initiative. They're generous without being pushovers. The phrase "nice guys finish last" sticks around because it taps into frustration. But when you unpack it, the issue isn't niceness. It's the lack of balance. Being kind doesn't mean losing. It means learning how to pair warmth with confidence. That's where respect and real progress tend to come from.